Welcome back to another episode of the Packaging Experience. And always with me, I got Tom. How are you?
I'm great. I can't escape it. This is one of my favorite job functions is the podcast. So happy to be here as per usual. Still in California.
Yeah.
You know,
I'm glad you're
here. Golfing. Yeah, I love being in the office. It's great.
Yeah, it really is. So today's topic, we're going to dive into the dangers of UV technology in FlexPak. And basically, we're going to have Tom dive into this today because this guy has the brains for it. And this is one topic he enjoys talking about the most, especially here in the office. And today, what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be just like you guys, the person on the streets. And I'm going to tell him to pump the brakes. Listen, Tom, you got to explain this a lot better. And then that's where we're going to go with that today.
Oh, I mean, this is a good week, right? Because we have football starting, which may or may not appeal to you. Definitely appeals to me.
Appeals to me.
We got good weather. You know, summer's about to break and give us that fall weather. So, yeah, it's a good time. You know, and we were talking right before we started a little bit about the Kelseys and New Heights and their podcast, and they just got $100 million for their podcast. We haven't made a penny yet, but if there's anybody out there that would like to pay Jeff and I, you know, we'll take half that. I mean, we're not greedy. 50 million, that's good. That's good for me. So, you know, obviously their topics are a little bit more based for a general audience, and ours get a little bit nichey. So, but that's why Jeff is going to be playing the role of John Q. Public and slowing me down and asking me to explain things a little bit deeper. So today we are talking about radiation cured coatings. So that's a broad type of coating that you have, like solvent-based coatings, which we use all the time, solventless coatings, you have water-based coatings, and then you have radiation coatings. Radiation coatings are cool because what you're doing is you're using some sort of radiation to make long polymer chains, and then they're really durable coatings because when you have these big long strings of polymers together, then it's hard to scratch or break, so you can get a really durable coating in FlexPak. And where we see coatings the most is to protect inks, and then we also see for like design, you see spot embellishments. So if you're not familiar with the spot embellishment, if you've ever seen a package that's like all matte finish, you know, not reflective, but just the lettering is gloss. You see it on folding carton. Even our business cards have it. If you can see it, let me see if I can get it into the light. There you go. There we have our little Freedom F there. There's a little spot gloss on our soft touch business card. So you see that in flexible packaging. You know where I see it a lot, Jeff, and is where packaging gets super fancy is in the cannabis market, right? So you see all these stand-up pouches for gummies, or, you know, like a rigid container for pre-rolled joints or something like that. And they always have some sort of like big sparkly something or metallized, you know, there's just a lot of, let's say, bling in cannabis packaging. It's something that we need to discuss. So we're going to go a little bit into what radiation cure coatings are, how they work. The two most common are UV and electron beam. We'll kind of dissect the difference between those. But what we should really start with is this cool, well, I don't know if it's cool. It's just an interesting shift in the marketplace. I worked for 20 years with digital FlexPak converters and Flexo FlexPak converters and digital label converters and digital FlexPak converters, right? And digital FlexPak didn't really exist in mass until recently. This is like a last 6 or 7 year deal. And a lot of the people that got into digital flexible packaging were digital label converters. And why I say that is because there is a different level of regulatory that is required for packaging that's holding food versus labels that goes on top of packaging. And UV was used all the time in labels, wine labels, you know, food labels, what have you, because it's on top of a label and then the label is on top of a package. So it's hard for any of that UV to actually make it all the way through the thickness of the label and then all the way into the package and then all the way into your food content. But if you go from sticking a label onto a package to printing the package, then the requirements of safety are much, much higher. because now it's holding the actual food and stuff can migrate through there. So one thing that you see, again, wine labels are a great example where you see spot embellishments, hot stamping, cold foil, all these cool things that you could do on a wine label, especially out here. We're in Northern California. We're about an hour and a half away from Napa, Sonoma, like some of the best Pinots and cabs you can ever find are right here. And if you're spending, $80, $120 on some fancy bottle of wine from a vineyard out here, that label's going to be on point. It's not just going to be white and somebody's writing Cabernet and ugly cursive on there. So they're going to put some dollars into that. So that was an interesting dynamic of all these digital label converters moving into digital FlexPak. But what they brought with them is UV cured technology and trying to bring it into FlexPak. Now, all of the major FlexPak converters and all the major CPGs like your Nestle and stuff like that, they've moved away from UV years and years and years ago because they know it doesn't have a place in food packaging. However, with these label guys moving into flexible packaging, they're like, why can't I just do UV lamination? Or why can't, instead of solventless, why can't I just do UV spot embellishment instead of E-beam or water-based or solventless? And we're going to get into that. So did I lose you yet, or are we good so far?
Yeah, and I think the one thing I would emphasize the most on is, and I think you're already wanting to go in that direction, is why would someone want to choose UV versus maybe having another option, and especially if it's damaging and just brings a lot of just damage in general. So what would be the difference?
Yeah. So barrier of entry from a capital equipment expenditure is a big difference why you wouldn't go E-beam over UV. A UV setup, you might be spending $60,000 or $100,000 for a UV setup to cure UV coatings. An E-beam machine, with an inkjet printhead, you're at 1.2 million. So it's 10 times more expensive to go with E-beam, but E-beam is 10 times safer. That's where you want to make sure you're doing business and purchasing packaging from somebody that's made that expenditure and understands that safety is more important than saving money at the end of the day. So let's maybe, if you're good and you're caught up and you don't have questions for me, let's go into what radiation cured coatings are in general.
Yeah, let's dive.
And then we'll talk about the differences between UV and E-beam and how they cure differently and why one is safe and one is not, even though they're both in this category of radiation cured coatings. Why is one safe and one isn't? All right. So in all of these coatings, you have like just basically something that it's like your solvent that it's floating in, right? And then for gloss, you'll have monomer and oligomers. Monomer is like a circle, and oligomer is like a line of polymer chains, right? And what you want to do is you want to take these tiny microscopic monomers and oligomers and stick them together, and then you get these long polymer chains. And how you do that is with a free radical. A free radical is radiated into the coating. That's why it's called radiation cure coatings. It's radiated in there. And then that free radical is jamming around in that coating, and it's like, oh, here's a monomer, here's a oligomer, here's a monomer, here's an oligomer, here's a nice long polymer chain. Let's do that again. And so you have a nice balance of monomer, oligomer, and your free radical in order to take a coating that's pure liquid, and then by the time it's done, it makes all these long polymer chains. Now it's a hard gloss coating on your package or on your business card or whatever you have, right? And that's what you want, is it all cured, all working well. Now, that's radiation cured coatings in general. You have your monomer, your oligomer, and your free radical. Where UV and E-beam differ are the free radicals that they use and the curing technology. So in a UV coating, which stands for ultraviolet, which is right outside of the visible spectrum for human beings, right? You have red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, violet. Next one is ultraviolet. So you can't see it, but it's the one that's, sunburns you. And that's how you can get sunburned through the clouds, because UV is pretty strong light. So even if it's cloudy out and you get sunburned, how did that happen? Thank you, ultraviolet rays. Pretty cool stuff. So ultraviolet can be really damaging to your skin. It could be a carcinogen. That's why we use SPF 50 and all that fun stuff. So with ultraviolet coatings, you put down the coating and then you hit it with a UV beam. And in that coating for UV, there's the free radical is actually in that coating, and it's called a photoinitiator. And basically what it means is photoinitiator, right? It's pretty obvious, is once it's hit with UV light, then this photoinitiator free radical starts doing that chain reaction that I told you about. It goes in through the coating, looking for monomer and ligamer, and starts to try to cure the coating by taking tiny little pieces, creating long pieces, and then you get a cured coating.
So really quick, is that photo initiator you said, just for the listeners, is it a chemical?
It is a chemical.
Okay.
And some of them are really, really dangerous. Some of them have a super low molecular weight. And what that means, it's so tiny and so light that it can migrate through. So let's say your package is here, you have photo initiator on top and it's not cured or in a chain. It can travel through that coating, through your packaging into your food if it has a really low molecular weight. So that photo initiator in and of itself is bad stuff. It can be pretty caustic. Monomer and oligomer are not great either. You should not be drinking those things or eating those things if they're not cured into a polymer chain. But as long as they're cured out into a larger polymer chain, then they're safe for you. But obviously, if you're handling any type of radiation coating, you should be wearing some pretty thick protective gloves. You do not want to just jam your hands into any of this, especially UV because of the photo initiator, but even straight monomer and ligamer can make you sick and you can start to get photosensitivity. There are operators that used to run on UV lines forever and they got so exposed to it that it built up that they had this huge photosensitivity and their skin would start turning red anytime it was under UV light. So it's chemicals. There's nothing great about it. We're not squeezing orange juice and making cool gloss coatings out of oranges and apples and bananas. Unfortunately, they come from chemicals, and there's always an inherent danger dealing with chemicals. So that's how UV works, right? You have your photo initiator in there, gets hit by the UV light. The photo initiator is your free radical. It turns that free radical on. It's like, yeah, let's go. Let's start making polymer chains.
And it hardens it, doesn't it?
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct. So you're taking a liquid coating and then once it's exposed to the UV light and goes through the change, then it becomes a hard gloss coating.
Yeah. Okay.
Or you might have some matting agent in it that blooms to the surface. So then it'll be hard coating, but then there'll be some sort of texture on top. And that's how you get a matte coating. So you can't even cure 100% of that matte coating. A gloss is the most durable because everything in there can be cured in a long polymer chain. So if you want chemical resistance, water resistance, just straight scratch resistance and durability, gloss is always the best way to go. It's the easiest to run and it's the most durable from all those standpoints. Now let's switch gears maybe from UV to E-beam and how they differ. In E-beam coating, it's just your carrier that holds the monomer and ligamer and there's no photo initiator in there. The free radical is what you're doing with an E-beam or an electron beam machine. This is really cool and super nerdy is you have a big array of tungsten filament in a vacuum. And then you hit that tungsten filament with a bunch of electricity and that tungsten naturally gives off electrons and that electron shoots through that vacuum super fast, shoots through your coating and then is collected on the other side. So there's basically, it shoots in this direction and catches it here. There's side fire, there's down fire, there's all different types of electron beam devices. But that's what it's doing. So your free radical are electrons and electrons are dangerous, right? If you're getting hit with electrons that are shooting through you, that's just like getting hit with uranium, that they bounce once, they turn into gamma ray and then they bounce again, they turn into an X-ray as they start getting slower. But if you're exposed to a bunch of electrons shooting through your body, if you've ever watched the movie Chernobyl, it's a bad scenario. You're going to get cancer. It's awful. But how these are all set up is that they shoot exactly one direction and on the other side, there's something that collects 100% of it. And if you have one of these devices in your plant, they have to regularly come in once a year and make sure you're not giving off radiation. But there's less radiation given off from an E-beam machine than there is your standard light bulb because it's designed to recapture all of the radiation as it's going through. So that's awesome. And no photo initiator, so you don't have to worry about anything with low molecular weight contaminating and migrating through your packaging. Now, here's the biggest difference, Jeff, that I think is important with E-beam is you get a 99% cure rate every single time because the machine understands how much electrons are going out. You know how much chemical or how much your dosage is MRAD that you need to cure that coating. Maybe it's 3 or 4 MRAD, but is designed to always shoot 3 to 4 MRAD and you're always going to get 99% cure rate, which means there's no free radicals, no monomers, ligamers, photo initiators, just an uncured coating that could possibly migrate through and get you sick. UV, You might get a 99% cure rate if you have a brand new UV bulb and you're running slow and you're making sure it's exposed to plenty of UV, but that bulb starts to deteriorate over time. E-beam doesn't do that. You might have to replace filaments and stuff, but it's constantly has a dosimeter on it and it understands how much is going out and it'll adjust that dosage and make sure that it's consistent for 99% cure rate. UV bulb, not all plants are the best at replacing that equipment. So maybe you have a 3-year-old UV bulb, and when you first started, you were getting 99% cure rate at 100 feet per minute. And now you're running 100 feet per minute and you're getting 50% cure rate. And you just have a bunch of free radicals that can jam all through it. And again, maybe not too big of a danger for business cards or for labels, but for flexible packaging, that's a huge issue. You cannot have UV. And that's why, again, all these major brands have not used UV in packaging for years. These label converters are bringing UV back into a space it doesn't belong. And that's the danger. If you want to do spot embellishment with inkjet, E-beam is the way to go. So we tell you, let's say you're a mom and pop bud grower or something like that, and you're sourcing flexible packaging, digital flexible packaging, and they're like, yeah, we could do spot gloss or soft touch with a spot gloss or something like that. You need to ask the question, how are you doing? Well, what's the technology there? Is it solvent? Like, because on Flexo, we'll do solvent coatings and all that solvent flashes off and it's totally safe. We'll develop a plate for that, and that's fine for long runs. But for digital, you don't want to develop a plate just for spot because you're doing digital FlexPak and then you're using conventional analog converting for spot embellishments. It doesn't make sense to burn a plate and do that if you're doing a run of 400, 5,000 pouches or something like that. If we're doing, 2 million bags for great value, no problem, because we're going to do it solvent. We're going to do it on Flexo and it's going to be safe. But where digital comes into play is like, oh, now how do I do that? So a lot of people go to inkjet technology, which is phenomenal because you don't need to burn plates. The inkjet head will just lay down your coating exactly where you want it. You can move it around as needed, which is great because with a plate, that spot needs to be in the exact same spot. With inkjet, you can move the spots around to match the graphics. I mean, there's really cool stuff, but once that, you just have to make sure that inkjet head is spitting out either water base and you're hitting it with a ton of heat to flash off the water and just leave the coating behind, or it's E-beam. Because if it's UV and there's a UV light behind it and you're doing FlexPak, you're not doing things, in my opinion. Again, this is just my opinion, going back to our disclaimer, in a safe way for the end user. So that's kind of the difference. And I know I kind of flew through a lot of that stuff. So, is really cool. You can look this stuff up. PCT is a great company out of Davenport, Iowa. They make awesome machines. There's another company called E-beam Technologies. One in Sweden called Comet.
That's cool.
And you can do all types of different things with them. You can do, at my old company, we set it up so we could flood matte and then inkjet gloss all in one pass and then cure both coatings at the same time with one pass through the E-beam. We had a Flexo deck and then an inkjet head, which is really cool. And that's how we're going to start offering digital FlexPak as well here soon at Freedom Packaging. And that's the technology that we're going to be using. News. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think I got two things I want to hit here. I want to go back to that. Whenever you say 99%, technically that's 100%, but they're always that 1% that is supposed to save companies. Just like you're cleaning chemicals, okay, 99.9%. Technically, it's 100%, but just in case that 0.1% gets out, it saves them. Is that kind of what you're saying whenever you're like, hey, this is 99%, or is it completely different than chemicals?
No, you're right. Nobody is going to guarantee 100% cure rate because something might happen.
Right.
So you can't really guarantee that. But depending on the chemistry or the air, whatever, you can get to 5.9. So for example, with E-beam, you have to use nitrogen to flush where it's going because you need to create that vacuum and it'll shoot through nitrogen, no problem. But if there's air in there, air will bring, pollution, water, all this stuff. So in an E-beam machine, you have to run nitrogen in order to get an E-beam to run, and you have a huge nitrogen tank. But that tank, in order to run the E-beam properly, needs to be 5 nines pure nitrogen. So 99.999% pure.
Yeah.
4 nines. Just leaving off that extra 9, if it's 99.99% pure, will create issues with that machinery and it'll have to be maintenance more. So they're measuring it. Now on cure rate, If you're at 99%, then you're doing great. If you're getting down to 60% and that's where issues happen. So let's say, another thing besides old bulbs is, right? Let's say you have an operator and he's got a date that night, and as opposed to running at 300 feet per minute, he wants to run at 350 so he can get out an extra 45 minutes earlier on this job, so he has time to shave and make this date. It's a completely hypothetical situation, but let's say.
Love it.
So now he's running at 330, 10% faster, and now his cure rate might plummet from 87% down to 62% because all that photo initiator spent less time being exposed to UV light, so it was less active, less uncured, polymerized monomer and oligomer, and also more free radical that's just jamming through your packaging. So there's a lot of risk there. That can't happen with E-beam. Like if I tell it I want a dose of 4 MRAD, and I'm running at 100 feet per minute, it'll shoot out enough electrons to get you to 4 MRAD. And then as I speed it up to 500 feet per minute, it automatically is shooting more electrons to guarantee that you're getting that same dosage regardless of how fast you're running. UV doesn't have that control where it's tied to speed. It's just like, okay, I want my bulb at 85% or 90%. But if you speed it up or slow it down, it's not going to increase the intensity of the bulb or decrease it based off of that. It's completely up to the operator, and you're just leaving yourself open to human error there.
Wow. Yeah, I was just curious about that, that whole 99%, because, a lot of people are always like, why don't you guys give the 100%? And it's not always that easy. So thank you for that. But my next question is, do you think this podcast will ever be able to both of us go visit a company or an area that we are able to record? That way people can kind of see what's happening. I mean, is that ever possible? I mean, do they do things like that? Because I'm not very familiar with that.
Yeah. So with my old company, S1 Labels and Packaging, we created a division called MBI S1, not Labels and Packaging. They're in completely different divisions. So MBI made the investment in E-beam technology, and they have that print bar. So we could go to, I think they're Manitowoc, Wisconsin. We could go. We can definitely film it. It's super cool technology. During COVID, we were installing one in Greenville, North Carolina, and we decided to do an RV trip just to get out of the house as everybody was going stir crazy. And I had to do an install up there on the E-beam. So I took my son, and I was, once you start saying cool stuff like shooting electrons through a vacuum at the speed of light, they're like, that's awesome. Yeah. I was like, isn't it cool? I mean, it's all done behind the scenes. You can't see anything, obviously, due to the size of the electrons, but they're cool machines. They really are.
Absolutely.
There's tons of different applications for E-beam that a lot of people use. It's so safe. You can take like nuts on a conveyor belt and shoot them with E-beam, and it'll automatically clean and sterilize the surface of food. So that's how clean it is, because the electrons go in and they go right back out and they're captured. There's no residual radiation left behind. So people use it to actually clean food. There's a bajillion different applications for it, which the downside of that is lead times on getting a new E-beam machine. As I keep coming up with more uses for it, become longer and longer. Especially during COVID when we couldn't get microchips or servo motors and stuff like that, we were looking at like year lead times on a piece of machine that's $1 million. And like, here's half down, and I guess I'll get that in 2026 sometime. It's like a brutal.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know how old your son was at that time, but even me at my age now, I'm extremely excited to just try to understand this, to see it, and I think it's just a great topic to go over. This was very interesting. Yeah, this was a good one.
Yeah. And, the biggest takeaway is if you're out there and you're sourcing cool packaging with spot embellishments, or if it's got a coating of any type on there, and that's the question. It's like, does this have any type of coating on it? And then ask them what type of coating technology are you using? If it's water-based, it's probably okay. You should ask for the technical data sheet on it. If it's solvent-based, all those solvents get flashed off and you're just leaving a protective coating behind. If it's E-beam, you should be good. But if they say UV and it's on packaging and pouching, and I don't care. And here's a really important thing, Jeff, that I kind of left off is like, well, my package has a ton of barrier in it. So there's no way the UV coating is going to go through this, and it's a metallized pouch. So it's not going to transfer through the aluminum. It's got a huge barrier and it's not going to get in your food. Right. Sure, but when are you applying that coating? Because you could be applying that coating and then you re-roll it. So that uncured coating is now touching the inside of the next layer, and now it's touching the sealant layer of the package, which and actually is touching your food. So if it was like the last step, maybe if you had a super high barrier, like a cosmetic web that has foil in it or metallized polyester or something with a lot of barrier, might not be able to make it through there. But the biggest danger is the backside transfer when you're rewinding that film after you've coated it to move it over to your pouching line. Now it's touching the front of one side is touching the back of the other. So that coating that's not potentially fully cured is now touching your sealant layer. That's where the cannabis goes, or that's what your coffee goes into, and it's touching that, it's picking it up, and now you're ingesting it, and you're, putting your customers at risk of getting sick from it.
Wow. Yeah, just to kind of dive into that a little bit more, is there other ways to avoid that? Besides what you already explained?
Well, you can always go with just like a laminated structure, right? If you're doing like a straight gloss and it has to be laminated. Now, this is interesting because we talked about in our 2 podcasts ago, we talked about the benefits of surface print.
Yeah.
Right. So there's no lamination in surface print, but there's a coating, but it's a solvent based coating. So it's safe. Now, there's some situations, like we said, that there's no way you're getting around lamination. If you're boiling bag or cooking bag or steaming bag for your microwave, you have to bury those inks. So as long as it's laminated and there's no spot coating on top, you're safe. Or if you're not doing any type of spot coating at all, you should be safe. But it's really around the technology. It's not just what you want to find out is, are you coating it? Is it UV? If you ask those 2 questions and they say yes to both, I would highly recommend not sourcing packaging from those people. And I know I'm going to upset some people that if they listen to this because they're doing UV currently. But again, I don't think it's morally responsible for UV to be anywhere near flexible packaging at all.
Yeah. No, that's great. Yeah, this is, I definitely think this serves as a good video considering that the type of information that you can get and the dangers of certain things. And if you are the one using UV technology, again, it's entirely up to you on the direction that you go, but there's ways that you can change how you do things. And Tom did a great explanation of the pros and the cons. So yeah, this was great.
Yeah, we sold coatings for E-beam for a long time. So if you're, wondering, hey, can you put me in touch with a FlexPak converter that can provide us with E-beam spot coating? We could do that. I know Freedom within the next 3 or 6 months is going to be offering that, but we have sources today. So hit us in the comments or shoot us an email or what have you, reach out to us or our website and say, hey, can you point me in the right direction for somebody that's doing this in a morally responsible and chemically responsible way? And happy to send you a couple different options based on where your geography is. I know there's one out in California. There's one in Wisconsin. There's one in North Carolina. So we can probably, that's the East Coast, the Midwest, and the East right there. So we can find somebody that's a day or 2 away from you for sure.
And we can always put some more information in the description for you guys as well. That way you guys aren't having to dig too much. A little bit easier just to have a click of, nice click of a button, takes you straight there, or just anything informational we can add to the description as well.
No doubt. And you know what? Where we should go film is there's also a great group of guys down in Austin, Texas called Wildkind. They're doing E-beam. And the reason I'm picking that out is because I'm such a barbecue lover. It's like, well, if we're going to go somewhere, let's go to Austin and catch some live music and eat some amazing barbecue. That sounds right up my alley.
Yeah.
And you're Mr. Hunter and beef jerky, so I'm sure that rings true for you too.
Yeah, I smell like beef jerky every day. Yeah. But yeah, no, Texas would be fun. That'd be great. I think that'd be good for the listeners and the viewers to understand how it really works. And, for me personally, whenever I hear something on a podcast, I'm like, man, I wish I could just see the video of how it's done. And it just gives you such a different perspective on it and understanding. And I think would be very valuable for them.
Yeah, no doubt. No doubt. So, anything else we wanted to cover today on this nerdy monomer, ligamer, photoinitiator, free radical stuff?
No, I absolutely enjoyed being the liaison for a little bit and trying to the listeners understand decoding Tom, because you are in that category very, very smart. And like you were saying, you just are very excited to talk about things. And me personally, I don't have anything. I think this was a good podcast. I think this was a good episode for the listeners, and I think they're going to love this one.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you did, smash the like button, hit the subscribe button. As always, tell your friends about Nerdy Tom and Cool Guy Jeff sitting here talking about ridiculous topics that we find important that hopefully you do too. And again, always open to suggestions on what you would like us to talk about on the next episode of The Packaging Experience. I don't have a voice for radio.
Me neither.
I don't have a face for TV either. I don't know why I'm doing this.
I feel like I'm cross-eyed half the times. They're like, no, this guy can't be on TV. And we're sick too, so our voices are gone. We have beautiful angel voices. So, anyways, we love you guys.
Yeah.
And we'll see you guys on the next episode of The Packaging Experience. You guys have a great day.
See ya. Bye.